So many people that I coach get confused and think that success is just you having runaway hits. That's not how it works. It's not how it ever works. If you're not failing regularly, as one person said, then you might be playing it a little bit too safe. My name is Damon Brown of DamonBrown.net. My main thing is helping you as a side hustler, a solopreneur, or otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. Today we're talking about Brene Brown and specifically how you can fail well. Now, I've been a fan of hers for several years. If you've been watching the show, you know I really dig her work as a social scientist, talking about guilt and shame and so forth. This is one of the first quotes that I heard from her book. I believe it was Rising Strong, my favorite book of hers from those. I think it was right after Daring Greatly. But no matter what the case is, it's a killer quote that you need to think about when you're failing. And if we're doing great stuff, we're gonna fail all the time. Here's what she says. Shame is a focus on self, while guilt is a focus on behavior. It's not just semantics. There's a huge difference between I screwed up, guilt, and I am a screw up, shame. The former is acceptance of our imperfect humanity. The latter is basically an indictment of our very existence. I failed many times. I even failed this past week. This is part of the journey, but I also have a lot of accomplishments under my belt. They come hand in hand. If you're not failing regularly, as one person said, then you might be playing it a little bit too safe. I think there's two really big things we can get from this. The first thing is that failure is naturally a part of success. If you're not failing, then the chances of you being successful aren't that high. I recently did a show about Kevin Hart. He's the #1 comedian in the world, making hundreds of millions of dollars, not exaggerating, in his concerts, merchandise, movies, all that stuff. But like 15, 20 years ago, his main movie, the first movie that he was in called Soul Plane, actually was bootlegged like crazy to the point where I'm not even sure if they made money on it. But that bootlegging, which was a failure, actually exposed him to way more audiences. And when he got back on the club circuit, because he was doing stand-up, when he got back on the circuit, suddenly he could raise his price up. That led him 15, 20 years later to where he is today, where again, he's the #1 comedian in the world. So that failure of his movie not doing that well because it was bootlegged so much actually turned into success. Now, if he had too much shame about that happening, then he wouldn't have went back on the road. He would say, you know, I did my first movie, it was a failure, I'm gonna go hide somewhere. He might have had guilt about the way it turned out, but he did not have shame as far as I know. Or at least if he did have shame, it didn't stop him from doing it. Another good example is Steve Jobs. Classic example, I met him many, many years ago. I lived in Silicon Valley, just very briefly. His legendary story is that he started Apple with two other folks. One of the folks ended up bailing out early, unfortunately. The other person was another Steve named Steve Wozniak. They created Apple, the stuff that we're using today. I'm recording on an Apple. I have an Apple laptop there. It's ubiquitous at this point. But back in 83, 84, he got kicked out of his own company. The board kicked him out. Now, the Apple brand started to suffer because they were diversifying too much. That's all enough for another discussion. There's some great books on that, including Becoming Steve Jobs, which I highly recommend that book. And then they end up asking him to come back later because they realized he needed his leadership. However, #1, he was humble enough to come back, right? And he didn't seem like the most humble guy from the interactions I've had with him. And of course, getting to know him a little bit from the stuff he was doing in Silicon Valley. So #1, not the most humble guy, but he's humble enough to come back. So evidently his ego was able to be worked out on that level. #2, while he was in those proverbial 13 years in the desert, he was actually learning. And so that failure, what got him kicked out, when he came back, he became an even stronger leader up until his death about 10 years ago. But for those 15 years that he came back to the company and was alive, he brought the iPhone, iPad, the iMac, all the things that we consider innovation now came from him failing in the beginning. He got kicked out of his own company. I've done 2 startups. Second one I co-founded. I can't even imagine the pain and the challenge with that. But he had to get over that shame as far as getting kicked out of his own company and realize that that was part of the process. He might have felt guilty about those issues, but shame is a little bit different where you're not willing to show up because you're worried about what other people think. In my own case, I booked the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. This is the Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which is a compilation, but the original book was a tiny book. It came out on the 5-year anniversary. So pretty cool. But it came out about 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago now. And when I first was working in the publishing industry, to talk about my main thing, as I said at the top, non-traditional entrepreneurs, the side hustlers, the solopreneurs, all these different folks, The traditional publishing industry wasn't hearing it. They didn't believe that you existed. And even though I existed at the time, I'd already sold my company while being a stay-at-home dad and taking care of my little ones. They still didn't believe that we existed. We were like unicorns. This is like, again, 5-6 years ago. So that was a failure. And I had already done 17 books at that point. The publishing industry in New York, as well as on the West Coast over here, because I'm based in Vegas, West Coast wasn't trying to hear it either. So what happened? I believed in the vision. I took that failure, and within 6 to 8 weeks, I learned how to self-publish. I created my own publishing imprint. This one became a top 10 bestseller on Amazon. I was up there with Simon Sinek, Chris Gillenbaugh was up there with them from a self-published book. But without that failure, then I wouldn't have the thriving publishing imprint I have now. Now I have 7 books under my belt from my own imprint, including a new one, Built From Now. This would not exist without my failure in the traditional publishing industry, which I'd already done 17 books with the traditional publishing industry, and they were not trying to have me do the 18th. So I had to come up with my own path. But if I was stuck in shame about failing, then we wouldn't be speaking right now. These books wouldn't exist. Y'all, again, made the original Bite-Sized Entrepreneur a bestseller. You supported all the other books since then, including a new one, Built From Now. I thank you for that. Those books would not exist if I was stuck in shame, rather than feeling guilty that I wasn't able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish initially. Because so many people that I coach get confused and think that success is just you having runaway hits. That's not how it works. It's not how it ever works. The second thing is that even if you feel shame, and shame has to do with what other people think of you, and we can break that down even more. Even if you do that, shame isn't going to get you success. As they used to say, you can't get there from here. Guilt is judging yourself based on what you think you should do, based on your internal ethics. I talk about that a lot more in my popular TED Talk called You Should Strive for Good Enough. I'll throw a link in here. But I talk about that. Guilt is you judging yourself because you have a higher standard. I could have done better with that. Shame is the fear, not actual judging, but the fear of being judged by other people and feeling like you're not good enough. Guilt is an internal metric. Shame is how you think people are perceiving you. So shame might not even have to do with your actions, but how you think other people are going to judge you. Those are two very different areas. One is an internal metric. If you have a certain standard and you did not meet it, it's okay to feel guilty about that, right? I was going to eat better today. I didn't. I feel guilty about it. That's one thing. I didn't eat well today. I feel shame about it, so I'm not going to show up. I'm going to worry about what other people are saying. That feels totally different, right? You can feel it in your chest versus your heart or your stomach. It's a different type of energy. One of the things that I found as a coach, and I've been talking to a lot of my clients about this too, is that sometimes they'll be stuck, which of course, if you have a coach, sometimes that's why you get a coach, where you're like, I'm not sure how I'm gonna get around this. I don't know how to get motivated. I don't know how to move forward. I talk about that a lot in the book, Built From Now, but sometimes you need a little bit deeper stuff. So you get a coach. I've been talking a lot with my clients who are trying to move forward, but they're procrastinating, or their resources aren't together. They don't have their systems together. Again, as I talk about in Built From Now. And sometimes the reason that they're stuck is that they're trying to shame themselves into moving forward. I'm going to feel so ashamed that I'm not going to accomplish this project. I'm going to feel so ashamed that I'm not going to get through this massive to-do list. I'm going to feel so ashamed if my startup doesn't get funding by the end of this year, that I'm going to shame myself into productivity. You can't. Again, you can't get there from here. And that's how shame can kind of seep into our thing. I don't have a whole lot of shame, so that's not really the energy of mine. But I found that sometimes when I want to get things done, I feel a sense of shame, and that ends up pushing me forward to get things done. That's really toxic, and it's not something that's sustainable. And a lot of folks that I know that are struggling with their productivity or they're procrastinating too much is because they're coming from a sense of shame. Remember, shame has to do with the outside world. And so once you start bringing in the outside world and what you think they are going to say, capital T, as I say in my TED Talk, what they are going to say, as soon as you get into that mindset, then suddenly all these other things start to unravel. And suddenly you start to do things because of the optics, as we say nowadays. So this person is going to think that I'm doing great, so I better post this on social media. I don't want this person to think that I'm slacking off, So I'm going to do a bunch of busy work, even though I'm not getting anything done, and it'll be better off strategizing versus just focusing on the computer. Suddenly, all these things start to seep in. We want to avoid that. And one of the best ways to avoid that is to realize that shame isn't going to get us there. It's not going to make us more productive. It's not going to make our stuff more fruitful. And it's definitely not going to give us success. The main thing shame does is actually quieting our inner voice because we're so worried about what other people are going to say. So if you're thinking about how you can feel well, feel well, and fail well, suddenly the Jersey accent's coming out. If you're worried or if you're trying to find ways to fail well, number one, you have to understand that failure is a part of success. If you want to reach success, you got to fail. I'm failing as we speak. That's part of the process. You can't get there from there. Number two, shame won't get you there. Shaming yourself into being productive or doing well, it doesn't work. I've coached hundreds of clients. I've gone on my own journeys. I've talked to a lot of great mentors who have done way more than I have. There's never been a case where someone shamed themselves into doing great work, especially positive work that's nourishing the world. If you want more insight into how you can be your best self and bring your worth all the time, come over to buildfromnowquiz.com, buildfromnowquiz.com. It's based on my new book, Build From Now, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, and Nourish the World. And there's 4 different resources that we all have. This quick quiz, it's 2 minutes long, multiple choice. We're approaching 1,000 of y'all that have taken it, which I'm so proud of, and I'm so glad to help you on your journey. This quick quiz will tell you what resource you have the most of, because you might want to make an impact in the world, but it doesn't help if you don't know what your main resource is, right? And if you're enjoying this program, be sure to like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe, because I'm doing this for y'all. I want that feedback to know if you want more of this. This is a new territory for me, and I love to hear your feedback. Throw something in the comments if there's something that you want me to tackle, or something you want me to talk about in regards to entrepreneurship. As far as what I've learned, what I've experienced, what I've heard from other people, I'm happy to share that knowledge. And subscribing gives me the best feedback, as well as when you subscribe, it helps push things out and let other people know what amazing, hopefully, conversations we have going on now and ideally well into the future. Anyway, until next time, remember to bring your worth and that you can always build from now. Take care.